This is Vaughn Dudarian, the chair of the Oakland County Democratic Party. And I'm welcoming you to another one of our Facebook Live forums. Tonight we'll be talking to the two Democratic candidates we have for Oakland County Prosecutor, incumbent prosecutor Jessica Cooper and Judge Karen McDonald. We're going to be talking to them. This is honestly something I've been very excited about for a long while. And I'm very hopeful that you guys will find this as enjoyable and informational as I do. But as a special treat for tonight, you will not have to look at my gray-haired, crazy face asking questions of our candidates. We have a moderator here to help us out by keeping the conversation lively and informative. So Craig Foley is here. Craig, you want to say hi?
Thank you, Vaughn, for having me. I seriously appreciate it. It's a great opportunity and a great honor to be here today. This is a very, very important race given where we are right now in this country, and something that I think people need to know a little bit more about. So I'm glad to be here.
Yep, glad to have you. And I want to say one thing as we are about to get started. As you are almost certainly sitting in front of a computer, maybe on your phone, maybe in front of your TV, I would like to ask you to go to OCDP.org and click the donate button. We've been working very hard to try and find new ways to stay relevant and informative as a county party. Doing these Facebook Lives, doing these forums takes a lot of energy and a lot of work, and it's nothing compared to what we're going to have to do as we get ready for the fall election. So please, as you're in front of your computer, go to OCDP.org and click the donate button. Try and, we're trying to raise our recurring donations, and we'd really appreciate it if you could help us out with that and try and get us to a point where we can really do a lot of good work this fall. So Craig, I'm going to throw it back to you to introduce the two candidates, and then we're going to have opening statements.
All right. Well, I certainly do appreciate everybody for being here tonight. And again, this will be a lively discussion. We're looking forward to it. I would like to welcome Karen McDonald, Judge Karen McDonald, to the program tonight. And also, of course, Prosecutor Jessica Cooper. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here today. Now, we did draw straws before this to determine who would go first in their opening statements. And Karen McDonald drew the tallest straw, which means she gets to go first. So we've got about 3 to 5 minutes for opening statements for each candidate. So Karen McDonald, it is your floor.
Good evening. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Craig. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that I did step down and I was a judge, but I don't go by judge anymore. I go by my first name. And I think that's important that you do that when you step down from being a judge and run in a partisan race. So my name's Karen McDonald, and from a lot of you are OCDP members, and you've met me and spent a lot of time with me, and you've heard my story. But for those of you who haven't, I am a former circuit court judge. I served on the bench for 6.5 years. I'm a former private practice attorney in a large law firm in Oakland County, where I was a partner. I'm a former assistant prosecutor, where I prosecuted mostly child sexual assault cases. And I'm a former public school teacher, and I'm also a mother. So in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, things really changed for me, and it was a wake-up call, candidly. I went to the Women's March, and I sort of reevaluated what I wanted to be and where I was going. And I decided that I could no longer be the person who just feels bad about what's going on in the world. We're in a world where we have to be willing to do more. So I left my job as a judge, which I loved very much, because of what I saw every single day. I saw a 10-year-old boy ushered into my courtroom in shackles for hitting someone with a stick. I saw people with mental health conditions and substance abuse issues who continue to reoffend because we don't have a current prosecutor who will participate in treatment courts. So we can't address properly the underlying reason why people come into the criminal justice system. I saw domestic violence victims charged with capital crimes because our prosecutor doesn't care about them, that they were victims. And I saw a system that isn't working for anyone right now, but most of all, it is not working for people of color, and it's not working for poor people. I'm running on a criminal justice reform platform. That's no secret. For those of you who don't know what that means my focus is fairness and racial equality in our justice system, reducing and eliminating cash bail. It means that we should, my focus is to put more strategic use of resources to focus on violent crime instead of nonviolent crime, to end the mass incarceration. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other country in the entire world. And a greater focus, which is a big passion of mine, on treatment and rehabilitation to reduce the reason why people come into the criminal justice system and reoffending. So we're in a moment right now where we need people who care about people. And regardless of where they come from or what the color of their skin is, we need a leader who will not just put their personal agenda over the public interest. We need a change. And I know most of you agree with that. And in fact, my endorsements show that that's absolutely right. Since I began my campaign, I have been endorsed by 8 state elected official, Democrat elected official, most importantly, well, everyone's important, but of note, our Attorney General, Dana Nessel. 4 statewide Democratic elected prosecutors around the state, 10 local Democrat local city officials. I've been approved as a candidate by Femmes for Dems. I've been endorsed by 4 Democratic activists in the county, 4 clergymen, most of whom reside in Pontiac, 13 union organizations. I'm really proud of my endorsements, obviously, and I'm not listing them to impress you. I'm listing them because what that tells me is that I'm not the only one that thinks we need a change. These endorsements say a lot to me, but the most important thing is that I'm not alone. We all want this change in this county. We deserve something better, and I intend to give the people of Oakland County something better when I'm elected. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. McDonald. We appreciate it. Ms. Cooper, your turn.
Okay, well, when I was listening to the governor's response to the State of the Union, Governor Whitmer kept repeating this theme, that you can listen to what somebody says, but to know the truth, you have to watch what they do. And so in this particular case, we are talking about a time where there are going to be issues here. And the issue is this: are we going to talk about it? Or are we going to look to someone who has the ability to do something about it? And basically, we're talking about experience. But I think that one of the things that I have not done is a lot of tooting of my own horn. I think the more important thing is that if you really want to know who I am and what I've done, I think we need to go back to the beginning. So if you will indulge me for a moment, I want people to know who I am, as opposed to, and we're going to be talking about all of the things that I have done and I have accomplished. It's very hard for me to talk about this, but I come from poverty. And when I tell you poverty, I'm talking powdered milk, powdered egg poverty. That sets the tone of what I have done in my life. I went to Cass Tech, and at Cass Tech, that was the original melting pot where people came from different walks of life, people, different races, different ethnicities, even different economic situations. When I was at Cass Tech, I went and I got an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. to march against the war in Vietnam. And when I got there, it was a very peaceful situation in terms of the people who were there. And then I looked up and there were 6 people who were marching through the crowd, and they were wearing a brown uniform, and they had swastikas on their armbands, and they had placards, and that placard said, "Death to the Jews," and death to, they used a vile racial epithet. Those things in my very, very young years stayed with me for the rest of my life. That's what set the tone. I didn't have a moment of clarity. This is who I am. This is who I was born as, and this is the way I have lived. I have walked the walk, not talk the talk, walk the walk. I'm never going to forget that. I went to law school to gain the tools to make changes in a society that was very fair, unfair, And it was unfair racially, it was unfair economically, and I wanted to make those changes. And so when I got out of law school, I worked in the defender's office for a while, and then I opened my practice, and I was a civil rights litigator. And very early on, in order to earn money while my cases were turning, I took a lot of things that went in the door, and I went to the Southfield District Court, and there was a judge there. I can't make this up. He wore a red robe, but he was quite a misogynist. And he was running for office. I put my name in. I had no intention of winning. I never thought I would ever win, but I won. And I became the very first female judge in the district court. And later on, I became the chief judge of that district court. And 8 years later, I ran for the Oakland Circuit Court. I was a judge in the Oakland Circuit Court for 14 years. I had a tremendous amount of cases that were high publicity. And then I left and went to the Court of Appeals for 2 years. When I got off of the Court of Appeals to run for this particular position, I became a labor arbitrator. You have to give up your firstborn child in order to get that certification. But basically, I worked very hard. I've also founded an organization called the National Association of Women Judges. And that has now turned into an international association. So when I founded it, there were very few female judges anywhere in the United States. We all got together, founded this organization. It is now an international organization and one of the most progressive organizations for women in the world. I still belong to that. I've also become, I was an adjunct professor of law at Michigan State University and an adjunct professor of law at the University of Michigan. So I've done an awful lot before I became the prosecutor. When I became the prosecutor of Oakland County, you have to understand, not only was I the first woman prosecutor, I was the first Democrat in 40 years.
All right. Well, the time is up for that question, and I do want to make sure that we have time to get to all the different questions that we have, and I thank you for that. And I apologize for the interruption, but I will do it to both of you if we need to. And so now we sort of flip the order here. We go to Jessica Cooper for this first question, and you mentioned some of the disparities that you saw in the legal system, and given what is happening in the country right now, the discussions that we're having about racial injustice in the judicial system, from your perspective, what role have prosecutors played over the years in creating the system that we have right now that clearly sees, in many people's eyes, two justice systems, one for white Americans, one for African Americans? What do you think has been the role of prosecutors in that over the years?
Well, in terms of being a prosecutor, I think that the issue is looking at cases fairly and impartially. I think my training as a judge, being able to listen to both sides of a case is something that's very important as a prosecutor. In my office, we look at each case individually based upon the law, based upon the facts as they're brought to us. I don't think that people understand that, particularly in Oakland County, we deal with 45 different police agencies. Those agencies are the people on the street. They bring those cases to us. So when they bring us to the Warrants Division, sometimes it comes through in person, sometimes it comes through a system called Oak Video, which is a dedicated line. We take a look at those cases. We try and weed out those cases that are not good. And in that prosecutor system, we never see anything that has to do with that type of racial disparity, particularly not in Oakland County. So when that happens, we start that system. And when we're talking about the system, it's important that we know the difference between what roles different people play. So the police are on the street, the prosecutor begins the system of due process of law. Sometimes we'll write the case, and sometimes we won't write that case because the proofs are insufficient, or it's something that's ridiculous, or or, sometimes in Michigan and in our office, sometimes it's as much as 30% of the cases a year. We try and divert people from that system. We have a first offenders office. We have a teen court for the younger people. And in terms of knowing that system, once we write that warrant and once it is arraigned, the individual who will affect what happens is the judge. And the judge will make the determination of what happens to that person. The judge will make the determination as to whether or not there's incarceration or if they go into the many diversions that are allowed. And if we were to read the PAM booklet that they put out every year in terms of Michigan Department of Corrections, 1 in 10 individuals comes to the prison system in terms of incarceration. And so that is a very low thing. It means that 9 of 10 people are in some type of a diversionary program or in a jail sentence, which is no more than a year. We don't identify cases by race. Certainly, it would never happen in our office that we would do that. And sometimes there is a much higher rate in terms of not just the defendant, but in terms of the people who are the victims. And there is, if there's a disparity with the defendant, sometimes and most times there's a disparity with the victims. And that is one of the things that prosecutors have to be concerned about. And one of the things that we are concerned about, we have a victims advocate within our office. We have situations where sometimes the victims come in to talk about the case. Sometimes when there's a death, we're always going to be talking to the victims' families. So it's not something that we see as a regular basis. It's not something that when we look at all of the statistics that come out, those statistics don't go by county in many instances. And so we're talking about something that's different. Oakland County is, perhaps because you had a Democratic prosecutor here, a very different type of system. And what we have is a prosecutor who goes into the schools. And I have been in the schools about 500 times in 11 years. And I talk to those kids because the way to break that pipeline is to go into the schools. And because of that, the cases that we have had, and particularly in juvenile petitions, are down 63%. In 11 years, 63%, because of work in the community. And I am
Thank you, Jessica Cooper. We appreciate it. Time is up on that one. Same question to Karen McDonald. When you take a look at the justice system, are there prosecutorial practices that have led to the current situation that we're in right now?
Yes, 100%. Criminal justice reform is important because the system isn't working for people of color. And I don't know what statistics that Jessica is looking at, but she's just plain wrong. We do have this problem in Oakland County. And while it's more difficult to grasp because she's not releasing or transparent about who she charges and what she charges them with, in Oakland County, or in the state of Michigan, 54% of the people in our prison system are Black, despite only a 14% of the state's population. My team did an investigation of just what was in the public forum that we could discover of drug convictions during the time Jessica was prosecutor, and the drug convictions were somewhere about 30 to 40% of people of color, but the actual population of people of color in Oakland County is much, much less than that. It ranges anywhere, it's average about 15%. So we do have that problem. And let me just say this, writing a warrant that police officers bring you and not caring about anything else is how we got here. And where we are is in a system where we incarcerate Black people at a far greater rate than we do white people, and they don't commit crimes more often. So I'm really confused where the data is coming from, or why her statement is it's not something we do here. We absolutely do it here. Just because you don't care enough to figure out who you're charging and release the data about who you're charging doesn't mean that it doesn't occur. A couple more points here. Jessica Cooper just mentioned PAM. PAM is an instrumental group and association. It's the Prosecuting Association of Michigan. It's led by the Attorney General, and it's made up of all of the state elected prosecutors in the entire state. It provides very important training, and it is a way to collaborate and advise on legislation and all sorts of really good things you need to know about being a prosecutor. Jessica Cooper will not participate in PAM. Jessica Cooper will not go to a meeting. Jessica Cooper is not on speaking terms with many of her fellow state elected prosecutors. Lastly, the issue of this isn't my problem. It's the judge who sentenced people to jail. It's the judge who sets cash bail. It's not my problem. I 100% disagree. We cannot have criminal justice system in this county unless the prosecutor embraces it. And we have to talk about what's going on. And what's going on is that we're charging people of color at a much higher rate than we are white people. That's happening. And if you don't really believe me, go ask the people of Pontiac, because I've spent a lot of time talking to them, and they will tell you. This is happening. The prosecutor is the key. And that's why I'm running for prosecutor, because you can legislate all you want. As a perfect example, in 2008, when Jessica Cooper was elected, she decided she would not participate in our drug treatment courts in Oakland County. We had to have an emergency rewrite in Lansing so that Oakland County could even have a drug treatment court, because it required the prosecutor's participation. And yet we still have it. We just don't have a prosecutor who's willing to sit at the table, not her assistant prosecutors, because they all want to participate. It's Jessica Cooper, because of some personal issue she has, will not participate in treatment courts, won't participate in veterans court. We can't reduce mass incarceration without caring about people. We need to focus on why people are coming into the criminal justice system and address those underlying reasons. And it's not a surprise to any of you. It's mental health and it's substance abuse. So to have the only prosecutor in the state who will not participate in drug treatment court in Oakland County, that is at the core of why we need reform, and it's what reform is all about. The system's not working, and it's time that we open our eyes to that. So the answer is what prosecutor practices can affect racial bias. Almost all of them, Craig, and the prosecutor is the key to it. So that's why I'm running to be a prosecutor, because it wasn't okay anymore for me to look at kids and families and people coming in with substance abuse issues and mental health issues and not have a prosecutor who wants to say, hey, let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how we can prevent some of this, instead of just asking for the highest sentence we can and having the judge sentence someone to jail.
Jessica Cooper, you do have an opportunity to respond.
Oh, certainly. When I first got to Oakland County as the prosecutor, you have to understand again that I was the only Democrat. And one of the things that I noticed about the therapeutic courts was that there was no diversity in those courts. And so what I did is I went to see my friend in the northern part of Oakland County of the NAACP. And I remember Wally and I going and sitting and talking with the judge there. And he said, how could this be? And I know how it could be, because I had inherited that particular office. And it was predominantly from Brooks, from David Gorsica, from Potts, who were very active in it, but it wasn't sufficient. And so we made a lot of noise. We made an awful lot of noise. And what was our response? The response was they went up to Lansing and they made certain that prosecutors did not have to be in those drug courts. And over those years, there were many problems that occurred, one of which resulted in a judge being before the tenure commission and ultimately defeated at the box because of the things that, at the ballot box, because of the things that occurred. Now, the more interesting thing about these therapeutic courts is that the Oakland County was not certified by the Supreme Court until May of 2018. And I am presently in discussions with, and have been in discussions with, our chief judge in terms of what we're going to be able to do. But because of the pandemic, we don't know when we're going to be able to open up and what we're going to be able to pursue with that. It's very interesting. I also need to tell you that not only am I active in PAM, but when Larry Burdick was the head of it, we used to have weekly phone calls. We've gone and we've made presentations. We have regional meetings in Flint, and I've been to several of them. We've gone and we have definitely given presentations for PAM. And so to make information, and I am on the legislative committee for PAM, and so to make those type of allegations without having factual basis is perhaps something we would prefer not to happen.
All right. Well, next question is for Karen McDonald. I want to stay on current events for just a little bit. One of the things that we witnessed in Minnesota in the last week, of course, in the George Floyd killing, was the removal of the prosecutor in that case from the county and appointing the state attorney general to oversee the prosecution of the police in that case. Because of that relationship that may be there with police departments around the region, would your office be willing to appoint independent investigators in all cases of police-involved shootings and make the investigation findings transparent when deciding whether to charge officers with crimes in those situations?
Yes, and I think that's why it's extremely important for the Oakland County Prosecutor to have good relationships with the other elected officials. The recommended way to deal with that, and it makes good sense, is to refer it for an independent evaluation or investigation and prosecution. But I think one of the things that is really important to me as a prosecutor is that we are transparent about what we are doing. And when you talk to the people, when I go out and talk to people who are very upset about what's going on now, one of the biggest things they talk about, especially in communities of color, is police brutality. And I think, we can't fix that overnight. And I know that just like as attorneys, we have an attorney grievance commission, and we want bad attorneys to be held accountable, and law enforcement wants bad cops to be held accountable. And the way to do that is transparency. And the way to do that is to create community advisory boards where you actually sit down with community members and you talk about what's going on in their community, because you don't know unless you actually talk to them. And not just when you want to get reelected, but actually having an advisory committee that you meet with regularly. People want to be heard. And more importantly, how do you know that's going on? You can't leave the investigation of a department to the department. And most of you know this, but the prosecutor deals with all of these law enforcement agencies, and it is very difficult to sort that out. But I do think that we need to do a lot more and focus on putting somebody in the prosecutor's office that is their job, to focus on those kinds of complaints. So there's a place for them to go. And then once you do know about it, you actually have to hold somebody accountable and take action. So yes, I would absolutely hand that over to the Attorney General's office. I believe, based on everything I've read and all of the people I've talked to, that is also what the governor recommends, and that is the most appropriate way to hold somebody accountable.
All right, Jessica Cooper gets an opportunity to answer the same question. Independence of people that are investigating police shootings and police brutality cases. Would you be willing to have somebody from outside the county come in potentially to oversee that investigation and the prosecutorial discretion?
Of course, that is the thing that we have been doing, and I know that that is something that Dana Ness will address today in terms of doing that. What this would be is a codification of something that has been going on for a very long time. Many times in a prosecutor's office, there is some type of a conflict. Sometimes it's, and we have 175 people in that office. It is a very large operation. And so there are invariably conflicts of interest that arise. And this is a very major conflict of interest. And when we're talking about all of this, what we really want to do is to get rid of that conflict. And so we automatically go up to the Attorney General's office. We have always done that. And what she is talking about today and what Dana Nessel is talking about today is codifying that. And that's perfectly acceptable. We have had Royal Oak shootings where someone knows someone else, and particularly when we're talking with those things, it's the most important thing that it, not only that it be transparent, but that it be fair, and that the people understand that it is a fair proceeding. And absolutely. And when we talk about integrity units, those type of things, I think that those integrity units should be outside of that particular attorney's or prosecuting attorney's office, because that is the only way that you're going to avoid conflict of interest. So we talk about integrity units in terms of looking at some of the older cases. But even some of the newer cases, the more important thing is that unit is not subject to that particular prosecutor. And so we've made that recommendation. I have been trying to get a defender's office in Oakland County, and I suspect that they're tired of hearing from me because I keep talking about going forward, and that would be the place to put that particular unit. So the most important thing is that for the public that we, we're in agreement, which is interesting, but that is very important for us.
You do have an opportunity to respond if you'd like to, Karen.
I would love to. A conviction integrity unit, there are 50 of them across the country. One is in Wayne County. There's another one at the Attorney General's office. It's actually one of the first things I'm going to do once I'm elected. And it absolutely has a independent feature because it's run by someone hired outside of the prosecutor's office. And typically it's a defense attorney. And their job is solely to review new evidence on cases and make a recommendation whether there should be relief granted. The good news is there are grants for this, so it doesn't really cost the taxpayers any more money. There's no such thing in the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office right now. And there's actually been no discussion up until about a few minutes ago. But it is something I want to do and I'm committed to doing. I've spent a lot of time talking about it. I've spent a lot of time talking to other offices that have this. You know, we make mistakes. And it's 2020. And when we look at what's going on in the world, we need a leader and a prosecutor who is willing to say, you know what, we made a mistake. And there are people serving time and were convicted of crimes they did not commit. And that has to be important to the prosecutor. So that is one of my number one priorities to establish once I take office.
All right, let's move on to the next question. And some of these questions have been coming in online, which I appreciate very much. Keep them coming, everybody. And I think this is an interesting one. And it gets to the issue of people who are jailed awaiting trial and the issue of cash bail. This is for Jessica Cooper. Are there alternatives to cash bail that could be implemented that do not force people who are awaiting trial, have not yet been trialed, but from potentially losing their jobs and their livelihood while they await their day in court?
Oh, yes. Yes, there are. And one of the interesting things, and I think you're aware of, is that the Michigan Joint Task Force on jail and pretrial incarceration has issued a report, and that report was on January 10th, 2002. It is my county that was part of that predecessor organization, and we had a working committee addressing those issues of bond, and that was 2 years before that was issued. We are in agreement of the recommendations that we have made, and more importantly, she just distracted me. The legislation is going to be a little bit slow because of the pandemic, but we're looking forward to that. And I think some of the problems in terms of the bonds in people who are in jail comes from the enormous amount of incarceration for what they call contempt, civil contempt of court. And when judges make those type of determinations, what happens is that there is no bond. And more important, when someone is committed to the jail for civil contempt of court, they are not entitled to a jury, and they're not entitled to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I know that Karen has made those commitments on a regular basis when she was there. And so we want to make certain, particularly, that that doesn't happen. There are provisions for and should be for interim bail. And there should be review. And when we take a look at the recommendations that came out of the Joint Task Force, there are many that can be done. And one of the things that have to, and some of the things that have to be done legislatively, taking some of those misdemeanors and making them civil infractions. There is no reason for that to occur. When we were there we were looking at the jail population during the pandemic, and we literally had to take that list where people were there on the basis of commitments from the judges. And we saw so many of those misdemeanants who were there. We saw so many of those commitments on the basis of civil commitments, and why they were there was a shame. They were there for misdemeanors. They were there for all sorts of things. Those come from the municipalities, and sometimes the municipalities use those things in order to have a source of resource for their county. And so the bonds and the fines and the fees go to those municipalities. And those were the things that we looked at. What we did is we went over 500 cases, and so that the judges would have the opportunity to look at them, and particularly in the pandemic, to say, this is fine, this is not a domestic violence, these people are not dangerous, and they should be out. And we made that list, we gave it to Chief Kumar, and she distributed that to the judges because only the judges could release them from jail. Those are things that are extremely important. And if you look at that, there are so many there who have been incarcerated on cases that had other less draconian ways in which that could have been addressed. And I know that we foiled those records from the jail, and I know that Karen has done that on several occasions. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address that.
All right, Karen McDonald, same question. It's about cash bail and recommendations of cash bail made by prosecutors in many cases. Are there alternatives that you would prefer to cash bail, or does it work?
No, it doesn't. And you know, we have to address the cash bail system. Before I answer that, though, we don't have over half of the people in the Oakland County Jail there because former family court judges like me sentenced somebody to 2 days in jail for failure to pay child support when they had the ability to do so. Children need to eat, and I stand by that. Those decisions. We have a cash bail problem, and they're sitting there because they can't post cash bails of very low amounts, $200, $300, $400. Here's what I'm going to do when I'm the prosecutor. I'm going to make sure that an assistant prosecutor is at every district court arraignment. I've spoken to many, many district court judges, and I actually served as assistant prosecutor in the district court. Many times those arraignments take place. We have assistant prosecutors who are already in the building. To say that that's the judge's issue and the judge is the one that sets bail, that's true. But a judge is going to listen to two people before they set bail. They're going to listen to the defense attorney and the prosecutor. And when you have a prosecutor standing there saying, we don't want to cash bail, we know that this person doesn't pose a significant threat to our community, and we're fairly certain there are other ways to make sure that they appear for their next hearing. Judge, we don't want to cash bail. As a former judge, I'm telling you that it would be unusual then for a judge to set a cash bail. That is why progressive prosecutors all over the country are addressing cash bail, because it's the prosecutor who really has the ability to move the needle on that. We know from the data that cash bail is not the most effective means to make sure that somebody returns for their court date. And for those of you who don't know, when you get pulled over for a driving while license suspended second, which then the prosecutor charges you with, that's the prosecutor's role, and then a cash bail is set for $200 and you can't post it, and you have to sit in jail until your pretrial comes up, you're not going to set it for trial, even if you don't think you did something wrong, because you want to get out and you want to go back to your kids and you want to keep your job. So it just doesn't make any sense. And in addition, it's at quite a cost to the taxpayer that we're housing people in Oakland County Jail. And then lastly, with regard to COVID, the Sheriff's Department actually distributed the list to all the judges about who was there. And, many prosecutors across the state had talked to me about what they did, and they went through every single one of their current charges, and they made sure that there wasn't an opportunity there for alternate sentences, so that we could avoid sending people to jail and exposing them to a significant public health risk.
Jessica Cooper, you do have some time to respond.
Well, I think that's very important, because we know that prosecutors are never there, at least state prosecutors are never in the 14 different locations of district courts. We are not there, and Karen knows that very well, because it's impossible to man.
It's not impossible. It is not impossible.
Well, let her respond.
I will.
In terms of the sending of people to jail, that is something, and that's foiable for anybody who wants to see how many times that has been done. So we're not here to assess blame, and we're not here to listen to some of the allegations that are made that are so basically untrue. What we are here to do is talk about the fact of the necessity of having that recommendation passed. We're talking about making certain that the legislature takes a look at the findings that came out of that court, so that we can address those issues of cash bail. We know that more than anybody else, that people do not belong there in terms of these misdemeanors. Part of that does come from the municipalities. Thank you.
Okay, and just to clarify, if anybody wants to use some of their time to talk about something that was said before, they are free to do that. It's just going to cut into your own time just a little bit if that happens. We have been going for quite a while already, and I do want to get to a couple of big issues. Michigan, of course, notoriously one of the states that adopted a juvenile lifer law. And of course, the Supreme Court weighed in back in 2016 on Montgomery versus Louisiana. And there are a number of juvenile lifers who are still awaiting their hearings on whether or not their sentences were excessive, as the Supreme Court ruled. First question, and I'm going to give you an opportunity. This is a two-parter here, and Karen McDonald gets this one. The thought of juvenile lifer law in general, the idea of treating juveniles as adults in the court system, and the issue as to whether or not those people should be allowed parole in some capacity after a certain amount of time that they've served. Karen McDonald.
Thank you. The juvenile lifer without parole issue is one of the biggest issues that really pushed me to do what I'm doing. The United States Supreme Court has spoken, and what they've said is that juvenile life without parole sentences are unconstitutional in almost all cases. And that opinion is based on what we know about brain science. And I've raised 5 teenagers, so I can say that a brain is not fully developed until at least the age of 26. Kids should be treated like kids. But the law says that every prosecutor was required to review those people serving their sentences, their juvenile life without parole sentences, some of who have been in prison for over 40 years. And out of 47, Jessica Cooper said 44 should remain in prison for the rest of their life. Now, that doesn't comport with the law, because the law says that only in very, very rare cases should we continue those sentences with life without parole. And I acknowledge, as does the United States Supreme Court and prosecutors all over the country, that there are some individuals who probably cannot be rehabilitated and need to remain in prison because they are a serious public risk. But I also believe that people can be rehabilitated. And I also believe that when somebody commits a crime as a child with an undeveloped brain, and they do certain things in their lifetime in incarceration to be rehabilitated, that we should comply with the law and agree to a term of years. And, you know, there has been a lot of national outrage based on our current prosecutor's position that she's going to ignore the law and she's going to continue those life without parole sentences. And these are real people. And some of these people, the victims in the case are okay with that. You know, some of the victims in the case say, look, he served 40 years in prison for something he did when he was 16 years old. So I believe in it, but it's also the law and we need to follow it.
Jessica Cooper.
It's very interesting because apparently she didn't read the case called Hyatt, which was the case that came from the Michigan Supreme Court, talking about what was the standard in terms of rarity of cases. But what we really want to talk about is why Michigan was different than the other states. And I was no different than other judges or other prosecutors throughout the state. And the reason that Michigan was different than the other states is that the legislature has decided and did decide, even before Montgomery came down, before Hyatt came down, they decided that the victims or the family of the victims had the right to be heard. One of the most difficult things that we did is we went over all of these cases in terms of reviewing the files, and we had, I think we digitized something like 40,000 pages of transcripts so that we could thoroughly look at it. But my first assignment under that court rule and under the rule that was made by the Michigan legislature was to notify the families of the victims. And here I am, after all of these years, these people who went through hell, excuse me for swearing, but they went through hell because one of their loved ones was killed. And these are cases of first degree premeditated murder. And so they went through that process of the trial, and they went through the process of the appeal, and they went through the process of going to federal court and the applications to the governor for commutation, on and on. And I had to sit there and write to them and say, okay, we're going to tear off that scab right now, and we're going to be talking about bringing you back. And the most important thing is the fact that we did bring them back so that they have the opportunity to stand in front of the judge before that judge makes that determination. And so the most important thing, I think, and the reason that you see so many of those prosecutors in the state of Michigan choosing that is because what we actually chose to do is to notify the families of those victims. And I have to tell you, reviewing those cases, I've seen cases that are absolutely heinous. Those are the cases that occurred. They were rare. You are talking about going back, and you're talking about perhaps one case in 300,000. And so we're talking about very rare cases, but we're also talking about Hyatt. And basically, Justice Markman indicated that they have taken that exactly out of context, and read those cases. So we did basically choosing to notify the families, and the families notifying us that they wish to be heard. And when they wish to be heard, we chose to notify the court that that was a hearing that would be taking place.
Karen McDonald, you do have an opportunity to respond. We're getting some strange feedback. We apologize.
The numbers are widely reported. It's been widely reported that about Jessica Cooper's policy on this and how she's an outlier on it. And I would just encourage people to look at it.
A follow-up question for both of you on this one, and we'll just take a minute each on this question because I do think it's important. Is there an age that is too young to try somebody as an adult? Jessica Cooper, you can go ahead and first on that one.
Well, I think that Oakland County under Mr. Gorsica made a lot of headlines about an 11-year-old who basically killed somebody. And what happened under that is that they were given the opportunity. They wound up in juvenile court, and he was given his opportunity. And unfortunately, when he went through that process, he came out, and he is now got into all sorts of problems, and he is now in prison. Is there anyone too young? I don't know. We had a 14-year-old who wanted to find out what it was like to kill someone. He killed a person who was a homeless man, and he liked it so much he came back the next day and he killed another homeless man, and then he liked it so much he came back a third day, wasn't able to kill him, and then went on to another person and was caught. That person, he was 14 years of age, and he was a serial killer. And whether or not you can tell that until they're 21 is kind of absurd, because his actions told you that he had the thirst for blood and that he did it. And so it's very hard, and it's very heartbreaking to see young people who are in that situation. But we also have to understand we're talking about premeditated, first-degree premeditated murder.
Karen McDonald. Oh, okay, Karen McDonald.
The answer to your question is yes. There is definitely an age where we shouldn't be charging kids as adults. I think the presumption should always be that juveniles should be treated as juveniles, and we should charge them as juveniles. Children should be charged as children. There are rare exceptions, but the default must be that a child is charged as a child.
We don't have a ton of time left. We're going to go for a few more minutes if you both can do that, which I do appreciate. One of the things I want to talk about is many of the discussions that I hear from people that are running for positions like this are talking about things that are judicial reform, prison reform, and sentencing reform. What can you, from a prosecutor's role, actually accomplish when it comes to reforming so many of the different things? Because it sounds great, but it's difficult in practice to actually get the various branches of government to go along with this. So I think this question would go first to, and Vaughn, you got to help me out here. This one goes to Karen McDonald. What can you actually accomplish from a prosecutorial standpoint that would actually affect the type of change that you're advocating for today?
So much, Craig. I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is because when you're a judge, by the time people get in front of you, they've been charged with the crime, and they are either going to plead or they're going to go to trial, and it's usually not going to be a bench trial. It's going to be a jury trial. In the family court, the child's already been charged. As a judge, I can't dismiss that. I can't ask questions like, well, where did this child come from, and what is his home like? When I mentioned at the beginning about the 10-year-old who came into shackles in my courtroom because he snuck out at night and hit somebody with a stick. That child shouldn't be charged with a crime. That child couldn't even understand his rights when I tried to explain it to him. So the prosecutor is everything here. The prosecutor decides who's going to be charged with the crime and what that crime is going to be. Right now, we have a system where prosecutors are trained to charge the absolute most they can, ask for the absolute most time they can, and they're judged that whether or not they're successful as what their sentence they can get the judge to agree to, or how many charges they can get. And that's just not the way it can be anymore. We have to be smart on crime. We have to give prosecutors discretion to ask real questions like, what's going on? Is this the smart thing to do? And is it the right thing to do? And absolutely ask the question about whether it's racially based. Absolutely ask the question if there's a diversion or a program or a treatment court. And if you don't like the way the treatment court's been run, then you roll up your sleeves and you try to make it better, because that's just who I am. I'm not going to walk away from a problem because I don't think it's working. I'm going to say I'm going to do everything I can every minute of every day to make it work better, because the goal is to keep our communities safe. And if we want to keep our communities safe, we want people to get treatment that they need, always be held accountable, always put violent criminals in jail. But for nonviolent offenders, address the underlying reason why they're there. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're incarcerating people for brief periods of time. We're releasing them back out into our community with no treatment, no services. They have less resources. They probably lost their job, their house, maybe their children. And now the options of reoffending are pretty much their only option. So we're less safe. So in my mind, this is why I left that job a whole year ahead of time, because I believe the real difference in our community to keep our kids safe is the job of the prosecutor. And we do that by being very smart on crime and by caring about people, and also making sure that we have violent criminals in jail, but that we're doing things in a smart way. It's not to abdicate that responsibility to, well, that's the judge's job and that's not our job. We don't have anything to do with that. No, you do. We have the ability to create first offender programs. We have the ability to start, and hopefully one of my goals is to help the circuit court start a mental health court, which is so needed. I mean, if you talk to law enforcement right now, they'll tell you, I go to all these mental health calls. We're putting people in jail for short periods of time for a mental health issue, and we're never addressing it. So the prosecutor really does hold the key. And that's why I stepped down from being a judge.
Jessica Cooper, your opportunity to respond to the question. What role can prosecutors play in creating changes to the justice system that increase fairness and frankly, make it better for everybody?
We go up to Lansing all of the time. I've held meetings at my office in terms of legislation where we sit on a joint task force like we did on the bond. We get together. Pam is a very, very strong advocate in the legislature, and they do listen to Pam. We get involved, but we don't get involved necessarily as prosecutors. Sometimes we have legislators who call us and ask us about particular legislation that's proposed. But what we do is we go out of the safety of and the comfort of being a prosecutor, and we go up and these things have to be changed. So for instance, we'd see something, we have a terrible situation existing in terms of guns in the school system. And we've gone up to the legislature to try and talk about it, to try and talk about and make these changes. And sometimes they're in such a state of disarray up there, getting something passed through them. And we're trying to say, do you have any idea how dangerous this gun law is, this allowing open carry anywhere near a gun? And it's fallen on deaf ears. So yeah, we are going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to press for it. It's not necessarily the prosecutor who is responsible for that, but that doesn't matter. We are going to work to make certain that we bring attention to that particular issue. And so we do involve ourselves in terms of the legislature, in terms of changing. And that I think that what's going to change is that work in the community. And I think I've told you before, and I can't remember if I mentioned it, I'm very much involved in presentations in the schools. And I believe that the way we're going to change, the way we're going to affect that pipeline from the schools into prison is by going into the schools. And that I have done. I've been very active in the schools, and they do actually respond to me.
Ms. McDonald, you do have a little time for a response there.
Thank you. You know, legislation is important, and that's why I'm very proud to say that 7 of our Democratic Oakland County legislators have endorsed me, and I've sat down with all of them and talked to them, and they want feedback from the prosecutor, and that's why they're endorsing me, because they know I'll be collaborative and I'll reach out and I'll look to them, and they'll look to me as the prosecutor. So it is really important. But the good news is we really don't have to wait for legislation. We have the power. On day one, I will institute reform policies that give assistant prosecutors discretion to reduce and dismiss crimes when it's appropriate. I will create and form and help and support diversion programs, treatment courts, veteran court that the prosecutor doesn't participate in, drug treatment, mental health treatment. We can do that on day one. We don't have to wait for legislation. And then I also want to say that talking to middle school students is great. But on behalf, as a parent who's parented 5 kids in this community and all of the other parents I know, and as a former teacher, what I would really love to see is a prosecutor who stops charging 10-year-olds with assault and battery and stops charging, 16-year-old boys with possession of pornography because they have a selfie from their girlfriend and that thus are stuck with 5 felonies for the rest of their life. Those are the things I want to see on behalf of my kids. So talking in the school is important, but what's more important is looking at the individual specific details of a person that you're charging with a crime and what effect that's going to have on that person's life and the people around them.
All right. Well, we have time for one more question before the closing statements. And this is one that came in online, and I want to get to it because it goes back to some of the current events of the week and reliability of testimony from police. The question says, will your office, if elected, and this goes to Karen McDonald, will your office hold police accountable by maintaining a list of officers who are engaged in patterns of misconduct, whether it be racial bias, excessive force, or dishonesty? Make that list available to defense counsel and decline to call those officers as witnesses in any criminal prosecutions. Is that something you could do?
There should be harsh consequences and accountability for law enforcement and police officers who take the stand and don't tell the truth, just like there should be accountability for every profession. But these officers are holding people's lives in their hands with that testimony. And so not only would I make it available to defense attorneys, I think it should be transparent and open to the public. The prosecutor doesn't have the option of firing or dismissing a police officer, but they do have an option of criminally investigating and referring that to an independent organization like the Attorney General's office. And one thing I really is that I will start doing on day one, and I've already spoken to many community members, we need to be a prosecutor's office and a prosecutor who will sit down with community members who really care about these things and listen to them. What are your experiences on the street? Why do you feel a distrust in the Oakland County prosecutors? Why do you feel disenfranchised? Because that is what's going on. And I spend a lot of my time talking to people, and I spend a lot of my time talking to community leaders in Pontiac, and it has to change. And the prosecutor holds the key to change. And yes, it starts with holding police officers accountable and being transparent about that.
Jessica Cooper, your opportunity, again, just to sort of recount the question, is maintaining a list of officers who are engaged in patterns of misconduct, sharing that with defense counsel, and also declining to call those officers as potential witnesses.
We have had that incident occur to us, and we had an officer that we believed was not telling the truth. We literally went through the files, asked any of those cases that were involved with that officer. We dismissed 17 of those cases. We then notified all of the defense attorneys who ever had a case with this particular officer, told them that they had the opportunity to come into court if they believed that that testimony affected that case. And that was in addition to the 17 that we dismissed. There were appellate cases that we dismissed. We have the situations that exist, and then that particular case, the sheriff listened, and we notified him, and obviously he fired that individual. We have had cases of police officers who have done that, and our response is to immediately find out what type of cases that they're on, identify those cases, and if that person is the key witness on that case, we would never put him on the stand. But if he is the key witness on that case, and there is no other independent fact for that prosecution, we will. We've dismissed those cases. And as a matter of fact, I believe that there was a lot of publicity over this particular incident, and we've done that on many occasions. And as we said, the cases would in fact go up to the Attorney General, so that would take any conflict of interest out of it.
All right, and I believe Karen has an opportunity to respond, and then we go to closing statements.
Thank you. Quickly, I agree absolutely that officer should be held accountable, but I also think transparency is so important. That information should also be available to the public, to the citizens out here in our communities who may have had experiences or interactions with that officer. The public needs to know. Transparency is so important. We need to release data about who we're charging and what their race is and what they were eventually convicted of and what charge amendments were made, and is there a racial disparity? And by the way, the answer is yes, we know there is a racial disparity. And then second, give assistant prosecutors really good training and availability and procedures and policies to really ask questions. And when they do suspect that there's something that isn't quite right about some testimony or something that occurred that they don't think is quite right, a mechanism to report that to somebody who will listen.
All right. Well, we've gotten to this point now. We do have time for final statements. And since Karen McDonald went first in her opening statement, Jessica Cooper gets to open the closing statements here. It is your turn, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that in these troubling and these very uncertain times, that safety takes on an entirely different meaning. And sometimes we're staying safe from virus, staying safe from predators and scammers, staying safe from hate mongers, and staying safe from the grossly misinformed. Too often partisan racists fixate on manufacturing sensational allegations that aren't true. And they have no foundation in fact. We live in a room, in a world that is divided, and it's divided based on the fact that people will come to conclusions without independent fact. The county wants leadership, all right, and legal expertise. And they want a prosecutor who will work. And they want the prosecutor who will work and a reputation that they trust. And they want a prosecutor who can keep the people out of the system, but who also has the experience and the expertise to make certain that the community remains safe, particularly with the proliferation of the hate crimes. This is not the time for on-the-job training. And so I think it's very important that you know that my opponent was an entry-level prosecutor for the Gorsuch administration. She came in, she hired in late of December 1999. She left in September of 2002. She came back after 7 months, and in 2003, she resigned again in 2004. And she served but one term as a family law judge and spent most of her career in civil law. She never tried a murder. She isn't familiar with complex forensics, and she has absolutely no demonstrative or demonstrated administrative experience. For some reason, David Gorsuch was a co-sponsor on 3 of her fundraisers. He and Lisa Gorsuch gave her more than $2,000. When we talk about being progressive, I don't think sentencing people to jail on civil contempt is particularly progressive because there's no jury and there's no standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you're talking about family law cases, what that is basically debtor's prison. What is important is that there are criminal charges that can be brought, and those individuals would be entitled to a jury, and those individuals would be entitled to a proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. If there is bias that is shown, what kind of bias is there? I've seen things in what has happened in this campaign, referring to my age. Perhaps that person's not going to vote for Biden. You want someone in the prosecutor's office who isn't given to exaggeration or to fanfare. You want measured and fair responses, and you want it based on objective fact. The job requires absolutely technical experience, legal experience. It requires compassion, and it requires the ability to teach and advise the attorneys who work for you. Those are attorneys who are looking to the prosecutor for guidance. They're looking to the prosecutor for expertise. And if you don't have that expertise, you can't give that to them. I have those qualifications. There is no question in terms of the qualifications and the comparison of those qualifications. And I have an awful lot of work to do. In terms of those qualifications, my opponent doesn't have that. She hasn't done the murders. She hasn't put in the hard work. I have. And to accuse me of not having compassion, of not caring, of not having transparency, that's fallacious and it's wrong. And I'm sorry that the tone of this campaign has taken on such an aggressive and such a nasty tone. That's not the way that Democrats work. And if you're a Democrat, you don't talk about somebody's age, you don't put out false stuff that questionnaires, you don't subject yourself to FCC regulations. I think that it's important that we conduct ourselves with some dignity, and this aggression is just, it's a facade, and I'm so sorry that it is occurring. I'm not certain what Mr. Gorsuch has to do with her case. If she's so intent on being a progressive, it does seem a little bit strange. But I think the most important thing is, and that we need as a prosecutor, is experience. And that's what I bring. You bring experience. I've walked the walk. I'm not talking the talk. We need to walk that walk and continue to do that. Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, Jessica Cooper. We appreciate it. Now, closing statement from Karen McDonald.
Thank you. Well, the truth is important. And so I guess I do need to clarify some things. I have more experience to be the Oakland County Prosecutor than any other candidate in the history of the office. I tried misdemeanors and felonies, and those were child sexual assault cases. And maybe Jessica Cooper hasn't had the opportunity. In fact, I know she hasn't, to sit next to a 4-year-old who's been sexually assaulted and try to get her to testify and feel comfortable. But I have, and I have tried cases, and I did have 100% conviction rate. And I don't consider trying capital crimes for child sexual assault entry-level cases. But be that as it may, however many jury trials I had, it's more than Jessica Cooper had, because she was never an assistant prosecutor before she ran. And I'm not aware of one trial she's done in the 12 years that she's been there. My sole focus on this campaign is to point out outdated policies. And we've had 12 years of a prosecutor who doesn't believe in treatment courts, who doesn't treat victims with respect, and doesn't want to address the problems. Cash bail, not her problem. Treatment courts, that's not my role. The data, I don't pay attention to it. We just charge the crimes as they come in. That's how we got here, and we need to change, and people need to change. And that's why I've been endorsed by so many people in labor organizations. And I do want to point out that she hasn't been endorsed by one sitting prosecutor in the whole state or legislator. And there's a reason, not because how old she is. I don't care how old she is. I just want her to care about people. And that's what I do. And then the last thing I do want to say is I did take 7 months off, and it's because I had my second baby and I spent some time with him, and then I came back and I tried some more jury trials. And then eventually I did leave the office and went into private practice. I practiced complex civil litigation and family law, and then I served on the family bench. But I did that because of the injustices I saw in the family court on a daily basis. And I have been endorsed by the Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel, and prosecutors like Kim Worthy of Wayne County. And they're doing that because they truly believe that we need a change in Oakland County. And so do so many of the people who have supported me. And yeah, I'm sure there are people that gave me money that wouldn't identify themselves as a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. In fact, I told my dad that story about maybe my opponent doesn't think I'm a Democrat. And he reminded me that in 1988, when I went to college, I put my Dukakis sign in the back of the car. And he said, do you really think that's necessary? I was endorsed by the Democratic Party when I ran for judge. And I've been endorsed by all of the people that I listed at the beginning of this forum. And I'm proud of that. But I want to talk about how we can create change. And we can do that by electing a new prosecutor. Oakland County, you deserve better. And I want to give you better. We need a prosecutor who's going to not put her personal agenda over the public interest. We need a prosecutor who's going to care about kids and families and say, you know what, sometimes we make mistakes. And I'm going to admit I made a mistake. We need a prosecutor who embraces change and progress, but still wants to keep our community safe and keep our kids safe. And I hope that you all agree with me. I know that you do, because I have, and in terms of my fundraisers, I think I've had over 200 hosts for my fundraisers that I've conducted over the last year. And I'm really proud of that. And I think it's because they care, they know that I'm serious about what I'm saying, and that I care about people, and I really do want to help make change. We deserve better. So please go to my website, McDonaldforprosecutor.com. I appreciate your support, and I look forward to being your next prosecutor.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, both of you. Karen McDonald, Jessica Cooper, thank you very much. We did get to a lot of substance during this discussion this evening. I appreciate that very much. Obviously, that's an important part of making an informed decision when you go to the polls, is to get as much information as you can before you make that choice. This is a big choice that is going to be happening this year across the board. Vaughn, I don't know if there's anything you need to say before we wrap this up for the evening, but I would like to thank you and the Oakland County Democrats for giving me this opportunity. We do have another one coming up, I believe, next week. Vaughn, correct?
Correct. Next week, we'll be having a forum, hopefully very similar to this, with the candidates for county executive. I do want to take a minute to thank Craig for agreeing to come in and host this. I think your radio voice is definitely a million times better than mine.
Well,
I also want to thank Karen and Jessica for being here and really, agreeing to this forum and giving us a chance to talk about a lot of the issues that we're facing as a party right now, and a lot of the things that we're trying to navigate and decide. I've talked a lot about how primaries are a conversation inside the party, where we decide for ourselves what we want to stand for and what we want to represent over the next couple of years. And I think that this race really illustrates that there are a lot of discussions that we need to have as a party. And having events like this, having discussions, hosting these kind of events on Facebook and bringing in people to watch them, I think is a very important function for us as a county party. And I would ask all of you who are watching this on Facebook now, and any of you who are going to watch this on YouTube when we put it up, please go to OCDP.org, click the donate button, help us host more events like this, help us bring more of these kinds of discussions into your living rooms and onto your computer screens.
well, and real quick, I mean, just, thank you to everybody who did participate. There were a lot of people watching this evening, a lot of good comments that were coming in, and there is so much material that we could get to, Vaughn. I mean, we could do an hour on each of these subjects individually and not be able to get to everybody's question, but I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. It's a big deal.
Yep.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
So again, thanks to everybody who watched. Thank you to Jessica and Karen for being here. Thank you to Craig for hosting. And please make sure you sign up for our email list, ocdp.org. Make sure you're following our Facebook page so that you can get updates whenever we're going to do any more of these events. Subscribe to our email list. I said that. Follow our YouTube channel, and please stay in touch. Let us know if there's any other discussions that you'd like us to bring you. But thank you very much to everybody. Please stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Take care. Have a good night.
Good night.